Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Keith Schubert, and I am joined today by Monica Statiel and Renee Razanowski. And we are NARIC's Data Security and Privacy team, and we work with school districts to assist them in complying with New York State's Education Law 2D. But first, some housekeeping. Renee?
Yes, if you have any questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to enter them in the chat. And we are going to take periodic rest breaks just to answer those questions. So let's get into today. We're going to be talking about Ed Law 2D, but not just what the law is and what districts in New York have to do in order to comply with this law, but we're really going to look at how it affects you as teachers. So I'm sure everyone is very familiar or have heard of Ed Law 2D, and maybe you have some basic understanding of the law or some of the verbiage that is often used as it is associated with Ed Law 2D. But we're really going to start looking at things that you can do in your classroom to protect your students' data and also the data of your school district.
All right, so teachers have multiple responsibilities, as you know, I'm sure. But then on top of that, adding the responsibility of keeping your students' data confidential in today's cyber age can be even more intimidating. So to help you feel comfortable with this topic, what we want to do today is break it down for you. We want to break it down into what data needs to be protected, why protecting it is important, and how it affects you in the classroom.
So Ed Law 2D was put in place in 2014 with the purpose of strengthening data privacy and security in New York State educational agencies to protect personally identifiable information. So personally identifiable information, or as we often refer to as PII, as it relates to Ed Law 2D, is focusing on two types of protected data. We're looking at student PII and teacher principal PII as it relates to APPR data. So the question that we get all the time is, what is PII? PII, personally identifiable information, includes any information that can be used either alone or in combination with any other information to directly determine or find the identity of an individual person. Pretty simple, right? You're probably still asking yourself, could you be more specific? Do you have some examples of PII? So let's look at this. So it could be an individual's name. It could be their social security number, grade level. It could be their race or ethnicity. Those are all factors of PII. You might have students in your classroom that have very unique names, like mine, Renee. That on its own can directly identify me. That is PII. You might have more of a traditional classroom with John Smith and Mary Jones. Well, their names alone cannot easily identify them. When you add other factors in there, like the school district, grade level, now you have been able to directly identify that Mary Jones in 1, 2, 3 classroom and grade 4, then you now have PII.
When it comes to PII, parents are relying on teachers to be responsible for holding every student's data in confidence and sharing it only with necessary parties, such as, in some cases, other teachers or administrators. As a teacher, you can establish clear security practices in your classroom, such as how and where you share student data, to keep it both private and confidential. I know we can often become desensitized to the data we are sharing and how powerful that data can be, but we need to remember that there is an actual person, a student, attached to that data. So for those of you that are parents, you wouldn't want your child's data getting into the wrong hands, right?
I know, I wouldn't want my son's data getting in the wrong hands, just like you probably wouldn't want your child's data getting in the wrong hands. And you need to remember your students, along with their parents, like me, trust that you as a teacher are keeping their students' data confidential and you share it carefully. In today's classroom, technology is such a valuable resource for you as teachers, especially educational websites and applications. And while we all know that these websites offer useful resources for students and teachers, you must understand which software offer adequate privacy protections before you jump in and start using them and signing up for them. So we're going to take a little closer look at this today.
So teachers are always looking for instructional assistance to enhance lesson planning, to make learning more fun for their students, right? So imagine a colleague just got back from a conference and showed you this incredible piece of software that helps students easily learn fractions. And bonus, it's free. So now you want to create user accounts for all of your students. So you register your students by adding their first name, their last name, their date of birth, their email address. And the easiest part is that you just simply check a box that says you agree to the company's terms and conditions. How many of us have done this, right? And it's free software, so you don't even run it by your tech department or administration because it's not like the school's paying for it, right? Is so can there be any harm in that?
Well, actually, there's a lot of harm in that. So remember those terms that you agreed to? That is called a click wrap agreement. You just entered into a contract with a vendor on behalf of your school district. Simply by clicking that checkbox, you agree to those terms. So you need to understand that the real harm in checking a simple box that says, I agree to these terms, it's important to know what a click wrap agreement is. So simply put, it is an online agreement that you agree to by clicking or a button or a checkbox that says, I agree. It takes the place of you signing via electronically or through a traditional signature.
So, Vernay, is it legally enforceable?
Absolutely. Click wrap agreements are just as enforceable as those traditional wet ink signatures and electronic signatures in the US.
So, by checking the box that you agree to the company's terms and conditions, not only have you made a contractual decision on behalf of your district, but you've opened the door for students to be exposed to targeted advertising.
And just so you know, this is how makers of free software applications make their money. It's possible that they give you some type of product for free and they hope that you're going to love it and you'll eventually pay for the premium version. Or they'll use that data that you've been putting in there and they sell that to third parties who target advertisements to you and your students.
Mhm. Yep. So part of EdLaw 2D's purpose is to protect students from their PII being used for commercial purposes such as this. Advertisers are literally building a profile on your students to market their products to them. So this on the screen here was taken from a company's actual terms and conditions. And let me emphasize that this is a very small part of a very long terms and conditions that were included in a click wrap agreement. And so I'm not going to bore you to death and read the entire thing, but I do want to highlight one specific part of it. Third-party advertising service providers collect and use personal data about your visits to and use of the website and mobile application, as well as other websites, in order to serve you with advertisements and content tailored to meet your preferences and likely interests or better understand ad effectiveness. Aggregate demographic and interest data will also be used for market research purposes. So this is a prime example as to why you as a teacher should not agree to a company's terms and conditions. In this case, you would want to work with your district's data protection officer to think about maybe another piece of software that the district has a contract with that won't be providing your students' data to third parties for advertising purposes. We'll talk more about data protection officers in just a bit. But let's pause for a moment. And Monica, do we have any questions in the chat?
Not at this time, Keith. You're doing great. People are getting their questions answered.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll continue on.
Okay, so we know that everyone in the district is working hard to ensure that the student's data does not get into the wrong hands or is used nefariously. So what are some things that can happen out there if that data is put into the wrong hands or is out there on the dark web? Well, an identity thief could use your child's social security number to get a job. They could use it to file a tax refund. They can open a bank account or credit cards using your student's information. They can apply for a loan or rent a place to live. And the worst thing that happens is all of this is taking place, and when that student goes to apply for college loans or they're out on their own and they start applying for things, they find out that their data has been stolen. They have horrible credit, and it's just taken all those years for it to finally come to light.
So now you know what data needs to be protected under Education Law 2D, and you know why protecting it is so important. So now we want to pivot to how Education Law 2D helps districts to protect student data. There are 9 elements, as you can see listed here on the screen, 9 elements, right? And that speaks to how involved of a process it is for school districts to protect data. So is this a list of everything you as a teacher needs to do to protect student data? No. But there is one person in your district that has been tasked with this job, and that is your district's data protection officer. So hopefully every one of you knows who your district's data protection officer is. And if not, you'll want to make it a point to find out very soon. You're going to need to talk to them pretty soon, right? So we refer to that data protection officer as the DPO, and they are the go-to person for anything and everything relating to privacy and data protection. And I know that sometimes they can be labeled as the bad guy who just says no to every software product that you want to use. But remember that they're only trying to ensure that everyone's PII is protected. Also, they're continuously working to identify every piece of software that is already being used in your district, and that if that software is collecting PII, they're working to ensure that your district has a signed contract from the vendor that ensures they are complying with Education Law 2D. The DPO is also working to create a culture of data security awareness throughout your school district and making sure that your district is managing and reducing its cybersecurity risk.
It's everybody's responsibility to protect PII in your district, not just your DPO's responsibility. So while, as Keith just spoke about, the DPO is working hard to ensure that software vendors are meeting the EDLA 2D requirements, as a teacher, you need to ensure that you are using district-approved software and you are not entering into those ClickWrap agreements that we talked about earlier. While software might not be something that you're dealing with on a daily basis, you are still handling PII. And there's a lot of things that you can implement in your classroom to ensure that PII is protected. Some things are, you want to be mindful of the information you're putting in emails. Check with your DPO and see if your district has secure email, or maybe they have secure file sharing, which encrypts the information that is being sent electronically. Be careful about the information that you have lying around your classroom or that is being displayed in the school environment. There are so many times that you could be working on something, maybe you're viewing a student's IEP, when you're called away unexpectedly and you leave your computer unattended. And worse, you are still logged into that system that would easily allow someone to view that PII information that you were just looking at. So when you leave your classroom, please make sure your computer is locked, and also be mindful of the information that's visible on your monitor for individuals that are coming in and out of your classroom throughout the day. So we want to ensure that software vendors comply with New York State Ed Law 2D. And there are some requirements that your DPO at your district is making sure that the vendors are complying with. So they are working on creating a list of all the approved software that you as a teacher can use in your district. So first off, you want to make sure again that you are only using software that has been approved. So please reach out to your DPO, find that list so you can make sure that you're using that. Sometimes a software will only receive PII of the username, and so a district may choose to assign aliases to students so the software doesn't even get the student's name. Again, you want to check with your DPO about this. However, for any and all software that does receive student PII and teacher or principal APPR information, the district must get a software vendor to sign the district's Parents' Bill of Rights and provide some other contractual information, which we are often referring to as a third-party contract. Or you might often hear a data share privacy agreement as well. So this means that you as a teacher or educator in the school district, the first and most important thing, again, that you need to do to make sure that student data is being protected is make sure that you're using software off of a district-approved list. This is where you can communicate with your district's DPO to see what software products have already been approved by your district, or find out what the process is to get software approved in your school district. Every district will need to work out the specifics of their process, so it will be important for you to work with your DPO when you are requesting software. So before we move on, we're going to take another quick break and see if any questions have come in through the chat. Monica?
No, we're good.
Okay. So now that we are on Ed Law 2D overload, we're going to start and look at some other things that you can use in your classroom, you can use at home in your daily life that will help protect cybersecurity practices.
All right, let's talk about phishing. Did you know that over 90% of cyber attacks start with a phishing email? Now, you might be saying, what's phishing? Well, phishing is a cybercrime, and it's a crime in which a target or targets are contacted by email by someone posing as a legitimate institution to lure individuals into providing sensitive data, such as PII. banking information, credit cards, passwords. And sometimes, sometimes they want you to just simply click on something in that email, a link or an attachment, because sometimes that act of clicking can enable the bad guys to gain a gateway into your district's network. And that can actually lead to everyone's ultimate cybersecurity fear, ransomware. So here on the screen, we see a classic phishing email. If you worked at this particular school, then it might appear fairly normal. However, there are a couple indicators that something is wrong. So first, let's look at the from address. Does your district IT have a Gmail address? That seems unlikely. Second, notice the timeline. This email says that if you don't do something within 5 days, your account will be deleted. Now, this is a common phishing practice, and it's used to create a sense of urgency so that you will hurry up and make what will ultimately be a bad decision. Another giveaway here is the hyperlink. This one, it already looks suspicious just on the surface, but sometimes a link may look legit, but the actual address can be disguised. So something that you can do is to just simply hover your mouse cursor, not click, but just hover it over that link, that URL. And hovering will reveal the actual destination of the link. If you were to click on the link in this email, it might actually open that gateway for a threat actor to gain access to your school's network. And there's a couple other things you should always watch for. Attachments are a biggie. You never want to click on an attachment from someone whose email you don't recognize. If you're unsure or suspicious, you should go to your IT department and ask them to check it out for you. And then finally, a good tip when it comes to these types of emails is that if it's offering something that's too good to be true, then guess what? It's not true. So in this particular case, with this email on the screen, you would want to report this to your tech department. And even if you weren't sure, but maybe just a little suspicious, the best thing to do would be to report it. Passwords. Passwords provide the first line of defense against unauthorized access to your computer and to your personal information, right? The stronger your password, the more protected your computer will be from hackers and malicious software. And guess what? Having a strong password is an essential piece to protecting data, student data especially. So we've listed some valuable password don'ts and some password do's, but let's start with the don'ts first. So first, don't use personal information. This is very common. People like to use their dog's name or maybe the street name that they grew up on, but that is something that threat actors will take advantage of, and they try to find this information out about you and then can easily crack your password. You also want to avoid using common words. One of the most common words used in passwords is the word password, right? So, but you don't want to do that. You want to avoid common words. Use something unique and different. Also, don't use the same password at multiple websites. Now, we all know that, we have all these multiple accounts and we like to try to use the same password because it's easier to remember. So you might use the same password on Facebook that you use on TikTok, that you use on your bank account. Well, if your Facebook was hacked, then guess what? Your bank account could easily be hacked as well because they would have that password. Don't use post-it notes. Oh, this is a big one in school districts. And, you know, we've all been there where we've got that notification that our password is going to be expiring soon and we have to create a new one. So we make it up on the fly, and it's Friday, it's near the end of the day, and you're thinking to yourself, how am I going to remember this on Monday morning? I'll just write it down on a Post-it note and stick it on my monitor. We've all probably done that at one point or another, but this is one of those habits that we really need to break, because this would just give students or anybody an easy access to your account. And then, of course, the final one on this slide: don't share your password. Don't share it with anyone. It's yours and yours alone. Nobody should ever ask you for it. So that's one of those things. You'll want to keep that top secret and memorize it.
So now that Keith has told us all the things that we should not be doing, let's look at the things that we can do to create strong passwords. So you want to use things like symbols and numbers and upper and lower cases when you are creating your passwords. So here's an example of I love the rain. So we've changed the O to the number 0. Instead of an A in rain, we have the @ sign. So that makes it a harder and stronger password for someone to figure out. Use things like passphrases. I swim in the ocean. Something that you're going to remember, easy to remember, but hard for somebody else to hack in. And make sure that when you are creating your passwords, it's not something you're doing 4 o'clock on a Friday, so come Monday morning, you know you're gonna forget that password. Because remember, as Keith said, we're not writing them down on Post-it notes.
All right, that brings us to one of my favorite topics: multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication, it refers to the use of 2 or more means of identification and access control, sometimes referred to as something you know, something you have, and something you are. MFA is successfully enabled when at least 2 of those categories are required in order to successfully verify someone's identity when they try to log into a system. I'm sure you've probably already heard of this in your district, and if you haven't, you most likely will very soon. Cyber insurance agencies are all beginning to require organizations to have MFA in place in order to renew their policy. It is an extremely effective way to keep your account safe at school and at home. Personally, a few years back, I had my PayPal account hacked. Afterward, I turned on PayPal's MFA feature. So now when I log into PayPal, I first provide my password, which is something I know, which then triggers a text with a temporary code to be sent to my phone, right? Something I have. And I then input that code and can access PayPal. So even if a bad guy were to hack my password, they still couldn't get into my account without my phone. So I think that brings us to the end of our presentation today. Do we have any questions in the chat, Monica? No, no questions. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for attending today. And if you do come up with questions later on, feel free to email us, dsp@narec.org. Thank you.
Bye.